Y'all are going to hate me for this one, but I have to defend combo players. More specifically, combo win conditions that have come about the Magic the Gathering format in recent years. With push design and play patterns, we've seen a big shift in how you win the game. But that's kind of going to be my point today. We're going to use Commander to frame part of this discussion, but overall, I want to go about the defense of win conditions like Thassa's Oracle. Talk about how they've actually led to a positive thing in the community overall, and how cards like this actually serve to improve the game and you as a player. One shot my opponent on turn 6. Should I have waited? So I made a new mono black sacrifice warp deck recently with Alpharel's Stone Chosen as my commander. I brought it to my usual pod to play with for the first time the other night and upset someone with how I played it. I played Alpharel on turn 5, and then on turn 6, I attacked one of my opponents with him. When he attacks, and as long as a permanent left the battlefield on my turn, which it did, I sacrificed another creature to Viscera Seer earlier. Then Alpharel does half the target opponent's life total in damage. Then in my second main, I played Wound Reflection. This effectively one-shot them, which is the point of the deck. But I think it shocked and upset them. So again, we assembled functionally a 2 to 4.5 card combo, just based on how you look at it. They knew what my deck planned to do, but I think it still caught them off guard. Now my question is, I wasn't in any immediate danger, my life total was 38 at the time, and everyone was still building up their board state, so I didn't feel threatened. Should I have waited more turns for Wound Reflection in hand, then make that move once my opponent had played more than 5 turns? I'm conflicted. Since that point of the game, the deck is to take people out regardless of their life total, and I have to do that once my opponent at a time. Well, so I have to start something and kind of do that to someone at some point. In my opinion, their board state was most threatening of my opponents, and even if it wasn't that developed yet. I love the deck, but is it too cruel the way it works? I don't want to piss people off every time I bring it out, and this is kind of part of the issue I have with the mentality of Commander players. And I will say I'm privileged to go to local game stores where people generally don't have these type of feelings, because I myself am the one to make sure I have these Rule Zero discussions. You should not, full stop, be apologizing for trying to win the game at all. At the end of the day, the point of any game of Magic the Gathering is to win. It is to win, unless discussed beforehand, that everyone is not trying to win, we are trying to do X. The point of every single game of Magic is to win the game. That is just objective truth. 1v1 60 card Commander, whatever it is all about to win, unless your Rule Zero discussion in Commander specifically, because you're not having a Rule Zero discussion in Constructed Magic to not win the game. That's not a thing. You are winning the game. All right. Even if you're playing something like Lantern Control, the Lantern Control mill player wins through mill at some point. Okay. Your opponent may concede. That's them losing the game. You didn't win, whatever. Right. The semantics of it doesn't matter. You should not apologize for doing the baseline of what Richard Garfield and all the designers of Magic originally, and still to this day, want you to do. Secondly, the speed at which you won doesn't seem that bad at all either. It's turn 6. The game has to win at some point. And you talked about how this is how you designed your deck anyway. Overall, without even looking at the card, to my knowledge, it's like a 5-mana Planeswalker anyway. So you played that out, you attacked, you had some other cards on board, you cast an enchantment. Like, there's so many points in this game where your opponent could have interacted with it. You could have destroyed the commander, they could have destroyed the something else, kind of countered it. Like, they could have done so many things in terms of interacting with you. So you won the game. And what I want to discuss here is the idea that players don't want to lose to like instant things. They always want to lose to combat. They want to lose to the slowest way possible. They want you, your opponents always want you to do them the most favors, which is so dumb, because in 1v1 60 card Constructed, your goal is to reduce the amount of time that your opponent has to interact with you. Your goal is to be either doing that or be as efficient as possible to where your opponent may have opportunities to interact with you, but those opportunity angles are so few that even though you're giving them the time, they don't have the cards specifically to do that. That is the point of the vast majority of Magic before Commander. Then we came into Commander and people's feelings got involved, right? And people are talking about winning too early, winning too this, and the bracket system has tried to fix that. CEDH specifically, competitive commander, is trying to do that in a flawed way, but that at least is a rule zero discussion of where everyone is trying to interact as fast as possible, win as fast as possible. And that is actually part of my discussion in a second. Commander games have to end at a certain point, and the I win buttons that you have are where I've tried to argue before how Thassa's Oracle and Craterhoof Behemoth aren't too far apart. A lot of the times, if you grab a Craterhoof Behemoth and you lose the game, that is probably your fault. Or you intentionally did that where you know you need to get rid of one player and you're okay with leaving the other 1 or 2 people left over in the game, right? Not too different from Thassa's Oracle. If essentially you are trying to win the game and every time you get that card out or a similar effect, some type of overrun effect, you are trying to win the game. It is just giving your opponents more time to interact, and that is objectively worse, right? That is objectively worse. So my argument in today's video is that the design of Thassa's Oracle and cards that say I win the game as efficiently as possible are actually a net positive for the game. With the amount of cards entering Magic the Gathering on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis, heck, even on a freaking daily basis, it is more important than ever to have efficient win conditions. Answers just get better and better. Cards and the way you get those cards through tutors and card draw become more efficient more than ever, set by set. So it is more important than ever, obviously, to just win the game in a way that your opponent is able to stop you the least. And Thassa's Oracle does that. Whether you reanimate the Thassa's Oracle, whether you cast the Thassa's Oracle, you have the ability to counter the Thassa's Oracle, counter the reanimation spell, you can counter the trigger. Even if you destroy the Thassa's Oracle, you can't get rid of the trigger. The trigger is still going to go off. It just means it's harder for your opponent. So if your opponent had 1 card left in deck and you destroy the Thassa's Oracle, that's their fault. They're not going to win. Okay, but if your opponent had 0 cards in their deck and you destroy the Thassa's Oracle, tough luck. Their devotion is 0. The number of cards in their deck is 0. They're still going to win the game. Thassa's Oracle is important. I want to give 3 reasons as to why, and why we should not be apologizing or feeling bad for finding ways to win the game that are even more complicated than this, because people aren't used to actually just trying to win the game. They just want to play with themselves. They just want to play solitaire. They want to fondle their own badingus and just build up this giant pillow fort and be like, look at me, this is a giant game of you know, present to the class, right? A giant talent show of me that personally I don't really care for, because I know you can do that. If you do it once, it's cool. Second time, whatever, right? A giant talent show of look what I can do. Look how big my schlong is, when I could just go about my 3mm defeater in Thassa's Oracle and actually just win the game. Because honestly, it's how you use it. Sometimes it does matter how big you are, but really it's how you use it, okay? Maybe that's something that small PP people say, but it doesn't matter. I'm still winning the game. I'm still winning the game. So let's go into the first one. It's going to be about Deadeye Navigator, right? And so the idea with Deadeye Navigator, I'm kind of looking over at some notes that I have right now, specifically at that, but it's more so that it streamlines complex combos, right? So Deadeye Navigator I specifically bring up because in the Commander format, there are many ways to break Deadeye Navigator. Insert meme of, oh, we finally broke Deadeye, right? So a classic example is something like Peregrine Drake. 5 mana for a flyer that comes in and you can untap 5 lands. It costs 5, you can untap 5 mana. It's functionally free, but you need the 5 mana. When that enters, you can soul bond a Deadeye Navigator onto it. Then for 2 mana, you can flicker the Deadeye Navigator, meaning you generate infinite mana. You tap out all your lands, you use 2 of it to flicker the Peregrine Drake, untap everything, you do it again, you pay for it again, you flicker, you create infinite mana. Then you cast something like a Walking Ballista for X equals a billion, right? You then shoot down your opponent by activating a bunch of times. How complicated is that? I just want to point out that in paper, you can shortcut a bunch of this, but even then, there are still a lot of interaction points. First of all, you got to cast the you got to cast the Peregrine Drake. Then you got to cast the Deadeye Navigator. Then you have to activate the Deadeye Navigator. Then you have to have the Peregrine Drake enter again and have its ETB resolve. You then have to go through a loop where you generate an infinite amount of mana, which you can again shortcut in paper by just stating what number you want. Online, this is obviously much more because you just got to click through it. Then you have to cast and or find and cast a Walking Ballista or some type of win condition for your infinite mana, a sync for it. Then you have to have that resolve, activate that Walking Ballista an actual amount of times and have those activations resolve. I just want to point that out. There are so many opportunities for your opponent to interact with this, right? So many times that they can have things countered, so many triggers to fizzle, so many activations. Like if you were to, counter the activated ability of that Walking Ballista with like a Thassa Tidebinder or something, yes, you can still interact on top of that. But I'm also highlighting the fact that Thassa Tidebinder is an interaction point for this. But then you have to interact on top of that. So now you have a stack going, right? Now you're reducing the opportunities that you have to interact even more, right? You have a bigger stack going because you're not trying to ping your opponent one at a time, go through some type of priority or whatever. All is that to say is that is an example of a multi-card win condition that is now just simplified with 2 cards. You go mill your deck with something like a Hermit Druid, you play Thassa's Oracle. That's it. Or you mill your deck, you get out a Narcomoeba or something, you reanimate some things, then you cast a Dread Return, you reanimate a Thassa's Oracle, you just win the game. That's it, right? Very simple. You shortcut a lot of the interaction points that you have. 1 activation, reanimation spell. Yes, there's some triggers involved if you go through the Dread Return route or whatever, but it shortens down a lot of the more complicated engine-based win conditions, multi-card situations that you have in cards, and it streamlines combos. That's the first one. Thassa's Oracle and cards like Thassa's Oracle that say, I win the game, allow for clean and deterministic win conditions that reduce, again, the complexity. So that is the Deadeye Navigator situation. Point number 2, as to why Thassa's Oracle helps. Instant win conditions, in my opinion, create meaningful decision points in deck building and metagaming, similar to what we see in 1v160 card and in CDH specifically, where because of the speed of the win condition in that metagame and in that format, you have to make deck building decisions to play interaction that better lines up with that. The reason I bring up Force of Will, if Force of Will is a free spell in the Legacy format and in the Vintage format, but I will use the Legacy format as the more well-known version here. And it's a free counter spell that is the status quo of Legacy. Legacy says to you that we have a ban list of cards. We're not going to be restricting cards where you still have access to some things like in Vintage, but you have access to all cards in Magic the Gathering's history, give or take a ban list. With that in mind, you can do some of the most powerful, broken, nonsensical things that any Magic player can come up with. The key is you have to play around the Force of Will. You have to play around the Force of Will. You have the Thassa's Oracles, you have the Oops All Spell Wins, you have the Instant Reanimators in the Gristlebrand. You have all of these super powerful things, but you have to play around the Daze, the Force of Will, and you as the blue player have to be playing sometimes the Daze, 100% the Force of Will. Or the Force of Negation. Thassa's Oracle and instant win conditions like that, or similar types of instant win condition cards that functionally percent an instant win condition, like a reanimated Gristlebrand or whatever it is, force players to make deck building decisions that make their deck more efficient. Like in the CDH format, you play to a metagame, you make decisions and play interaction spells and play removal and play threats that work around a metagame to match the efficiency of what your opponent is doing. If your opponent is winning with Thassa's Oracle, you better be mainboarding Pyroblast. Even if you get into a pod full of Magda players, you are still trying to play like Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast in your Magda deck, because in your other pods, you are likely going to be playing against blue players. You play to the metagame. And so it helps players build better decks. And we obviously have this lesson already from net decking and just having metagames in 1v160 card, but to play to a hyper efficient metagame in Commander, in CDH, or even mid to high level bracket 4, you are going to be playing the Force of Wills, the Force of Negations, the Veil of Summers, the Orcish Bowmasters, the Rhystic Studies, the best way to get cards and the best way to answer cards. Because that is what Thassa's Oracle does. It is a highly efficient win condition. It forces you to play efficient answers and improves your deck building and improves your ability to make decisions, because you have to then understand when you should use certain interaction spells, how your opponent's playing that out. Like, wow, they're playing Thassa's Oracle with some interaction up. I can answer this pretty easily. Am I walking into a trap or are they forcing me to have it? It makes you think and be a better player. That is what Thassa's Oracle does. It helps improve not only the complexity of combos before it, but it also just helps you be a better deck builder. The last argument that I have for Thassa's Oracle and cards similar to it is the idea that Thassa's Oracle also improves and vastly reignites certain combos that already exist. This is kind of like 1.2, if anything. Like it's kind of like a combination of both of the points that I already made, but just going about it in a highlighted example. Doomsday is an Eternal format staple. I would call it a staple. It may not be the best deck out there. It's ebbed and flowed in terms of playability, but Doomsday is a sorcery that's 3 black, and black, that says search your library and graveyard for 5 cards and exile the rest. Put the chosen cards on top of your library in any order. You lose half of your life, rounded up. And so what Doomsday is a combo deck in Eternal formats. And honestly, I've seen people build Doomsday deck in Commander. It's kind of funny. It's a combo deck where you create a pile of cards in your deck with or without a combination of cards in your hand, right? That instantly win the game. Once you activate a card or draw a card, activate a card from your hand or activate an effect on the battlefield or draw a card, you will be able to go about casting and or continuing to activate abilities of cards that get you to the bottom of your deck and win in some way. Before Thassa's Oracle in 2020, Doomsday was a very different deck in the Legacy and Vintage format. And I can highlight that through this great article that I can link down below from the Doomsday website, Doomsday Wiki. I've personally been going through this slowly through my own time. I want to try and like get into Doomsday, maybe not on paper, but just like add that as a repertoire of a type of understanding of a old classic win condition in Magic over time. So I've been, kind of thinking about this, and Doomsday used to be a Tendrils of Agony deck. Folks, Tendrils of Agony is a freaking Storm card. Why wouldn't I just play a Storm deck? Why the hell am I playing Tendrils of Agony? What am I doing here? I could just play a Legacy Storm deck, an ad nauseum Tendril Storm deck, instead of trying to go about playing Storm in a more complicated way, right? But this was before Thassa's Oracle, because Doomsday meets Tendrils, Legacy, Doomsday, Tendrils, whatever. What you would have to do is you would have to make a Storm pile that went, pay half your life, rounded up, draw 4 cards, black, and back for Infernal Contract, which honestly, before this article, I didn't even know was a card. Hilarious card. I love this card. Black. You pay that, you draw Dark Ritual, Sensei's Divining Top, Tendrils of Agony. All right, Tendrils of Agony. You need to be able to cast 5 cards in total with Tendrils to be able to get the win, because Tendrils, to be able to get your opponent, from 10, right? You need to be able to cast more cards, because you need to be able to put cards back. You need to be able to cast cards beyond that. It was a very clunky system. In my opinion, it was a very clunky system to be able to win with Tendrils. Tendrils of Agony requires you in total to be able to cast it 10 times, 10 times, yes, to be able to beat an opponent at 20 life, right? Because Tendrils of Agony deals 2 damage to your opponent. You gain 2 life. You go Tendrils, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I did the math for you. For all of you that suck at math or whatever, I did the math for you. You got to have that many copies of Tendrils of Agony on the stack. All right. You got to cast 9 spells plus put the Tendrils on there. Right. So imagine how hard that is with casting Doomsday. That's 1 spell. Then you have 5 cards left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 12 damage. Really, you got to be casting more, right? And that's just in a vacuum. And what this deck now does is that if we kind of sink down here, we have the whole FU wizards and all this stuff, right? Where's the specific section with Thassa's Oracle? It's somewhere here. But really, now, like Doomsday piles, Doomsday Take 2. So Theros Beyond Death was released in 2020. Among the spoilers were 2 cards that caused a lot of excitement: Underworld Breach and Thassa's Oracle. Now, you can now create basic Doomsday piles where you draw 2 cards, Lion's Eye Diamond, Thassa's Oracle, like whatever. You Street Wraith, Thassa's Oracle. You win the game. You're at 20 life. You have 10 life after you cast Doomsday. You goes 4 Street Wraiths, which is 8 life. You're left at 2. Thassa's Oracle, you cast it, you're there. Right? You maybe have some untapped mana open because you got to cast Thassa's Oracle, right? Thassa's Oracle took Doomsday from a more complicated pile, right? A more complicated win condition, and really shrunk it down and made it more efficient. What that then did was increase the power of this combo and took it to a whole different route. It separated it from being not a storm deck, but a combo deck individually, creating a whole new archetype. But also, as we said in our first point, brought down the complicated nature of it, while also forcing people to then be more efficient for their answers and be more kind of meaningful in the cards that they have to bring in against Doomsday. It's not just Flusterstorm at this point. Thassa's Oracle is a creature. Flusterstorm doesn't necessarily work, but can, depending on the Doomsday spell that you're creating. It can work to stop you. But obviously, if you're looking at your opponent, they have 1 blue left, you might be playing around Flusterstorm, and then you're going to create a Doomsday pile that works around that and wins with Thassa's Oracle or whatever it is. Maybe they might have consigned memory, so you have to work around the fact that maybe Thassa's Oracle isn't necessarily going to win the game or whatever it is. You're going to have to cast Jace the Perfected Mind, which once you cast Jace the, or not Perfect, is it Perfected? No, it's not Jace the Perfected Mind, sorry. Jace Wielder Mysteries, which Consign the Memory cannot counter, and then when you activate it, that's an activated ability, which cannot be countered with Consign the Memory. And so all this type of stuff. Cards like that help make decks more efficient. They make your opponents interact more efficiently and improves deck building in the metagame and shrinks the junk of all this interaction, while also creating whole new archetypes in its wake, and helps create, actually, like unironically, in niche cases, actually, as we see, creates a diversity in the viable decks in Magic the Gathering. It does. And that is why ultimately it increases that design space. And with all that in mind, you should not be apologizing for winning the game. You should not be apologizing for doing the very basic thing that you are meant to do with the cards being designed in Magic the Gathering. You should not be apologizing for winning the game if that is what is discussed with your opponents in a multiplayer setting. And even in that multiplayer setting, if you have discussed winning the game early in a higher power bracket, such as maybe high bracket 3, but bracket 4 and CDH, your opponent should not be surprised at that, because that is exactly what you're trying to do. And alongside of that, at some point, the game has to end. Just because you're the one that ended the game sooner than your opponent did, at some point, the game has to end. They are just mad it wasn't them. They are just mad that they did not build their decks to the efficiency that you had. They are just mad that they did not have the interaction. They are just mad that they tapped out at the end of the day. Don't apologize for winning the game. Don't apologize for just playing playing Magic the way Richard Garfield intended. I wish I didn't stutter there, but whatever. I got my point across. Thassa's Oracle and cards like that have an instant win condition balanced properly are actually net positive for the game. Some of them should be banned because we've taken it too far. Some of them are perfectly fine. They provide so many positives to the game of Magic the Gathering that honestly, I say keep them coming.